Well, in the words of Odysseus, the horrors persist, but so do I.
And dang, has this been a horror! Just kidding. Okay, but are we really, Sarah?
No, we definitely bit off way more than we could chew. But I guess the good thing is that we all get to suffer together.
This is true. No one better to suffer reading through dactylic hexameters with.
I'm sorry, what now?
Dactylic hexameters, aka 6-beat lines. That's how ancient Greek and Latin epic poems were commonly done.
Oh, okay, I see. Most lines consisting of 6 dactyls, meaning 1 long syllable followed by 2 short syllables.
Yeah, exactly.
You Googled this, didn't you?
Of course I did. How the hell would I know what dactylic? I can't even pronounce that.
Well, you know what? You know it, I know it, and now our listeners know it. Yay!
Welcome to Story Sirens, the podcast where we discuss myths and legends around the world, as well as stories and epic poems from our favorite books and movies. I'm Yenny.
And I'm Sarah, and we are back this week to finish off our 2-part deep dive on
The Odyssey!
We'll be starting right where we left off.
Oh, you mean at that huge cliffhanger you left us in when giants obliterated, Yu-Gi-Oh reference, more than, 85% of Odysseus' crew?
Exactly! How many men did old Odyssey have left after his run-in with the Laestrygonians, Yenny?
45.
Correct! Now let's continue to make that number dwindle.
No! Sarah, why? Hold up, Sarah, before you even begin. Fair warning to our listeners. This is the last episode of our Odysseus series, and let me just tell you, it's going to be a big kahuna. A big one.
It's big.
It's big.
I don't know what we were thinking, but here we are.
We weren't thinking.
We weren't thinking. So. We were just listening to Epic nonstop. We were like, yes. All right, so anyway. Odysseus's one surviving ship sailed east for many days. They finally found an island and decided to stop there to rest and, you guessed it, look for provisions. But the men were wiser, or perhaps more paranoid than they had been on other strange islands. They drew lots to see who would go and investigate the island and who would stay to guard the ship. The lots chose Eurylochus and 22 other men to investigate. The men wandered the island and found it full of animals for hunting, fruit for eating, and streams of clear, clean water. But then they found a palace in the center of the island. Totally normal.
That makes sense.
It was surrounded by lions and wolves, but the beasts weren't hostile towards Eurylochus and his men. They rubbed up against the legs of the men and made small whimpering noises, almost like they were trying to speak to the sailors. But the noises of the animals were soon drowned out by the beautiful singing coming from inside the palace. The men called out, trying to get the singers' attention, and were successful. A beautiful woman came to the entryway of the palace, smiling at them, and welcomed them into her home. The men excitedly followed her into her home, but what they did not know was that the woman hosting them was none other than the immortal sorceress Circe, daughter of the sun god Helios. And Circe had a deep hatred for humanity. She gave the men food and wine, and as they ate their fill, they slowly began to transform. Eurylochus, who had remained suspicious of the whole interaction, watched in horror as his crewmen painfully turned into pigs. He looked around at the wolves and lions that had greeted them earlier and realized those animals too had once been human. He fled from the palace and raced back to Odysseus. Upon hearing what had happened to his men, Odysseus went into a blind rage. He drew his sword and ran towards the palace without any sort of plan in his head. Luckily, Hermes, the god of sailors, travelers, and guide of the dead, had a plan himself. He revealed himself to Odysseus and cautioned the captain to calm his mind and think clearly. Hermes warned Odysseus that Circe was no normal woman to trifle with and that her power was great. Then, the messenger god offered Odysseus a white flower with a black root. It was the flower moly, which only the gods could harvest. Odysseus was instructed to keep the flower on him at all times in Circe's presence, and he would be able to rescue his men.
In other words, foliage has come to the rescue, y'all.
When Hermes left him, Odysseus was much calmer, and he hid the flower in his tunic. He approached the palace and saw there was a sty filled with pigs. His attention was then drawn to the beautiful woman who stood in the doorway of the palace, beckoning him to come inside to rest and feast. He followed her, sat at her table, and ate the food she offered. As he ate, she touched him on the shoulder and whispered into his ear, "Go join your comrades in the sty." But nothing happened. Odysseus then stood, whirled on Circe, and drew his sword. Circe couldn't understand why her magic hadn't worked, and she feared the rage she saw in Odysseus's eyes. So she tried a different tactic. She told Odysseus that if he showed her mercy, she would sleep with him, and they could rule her island, Aiaia, the island of the dawn, together. But Odysseus knew this was another trap, and that if he gave his body to the sorceress, she would have power over him and could destroy him. So he refused her and demanded once again that she release his men. Seeing that he could not be swayed by her magic or her beauty, Circe broke the spell on his men. The men ran back to the ship, terrified of the ordeal they had survived. But Odysseus remained. At this point in the story, there is some disagreement. Most versions say that Odysseus and his men stayed with Circe for 1 year. But some variations say that Odysseus and Circe had children together. Regardless, Odysseus eventually told Circe he and his men needed to get home to Ithaca, but had been met by misfortune after misfortune, and he asked her if there was any way she could help him with his journey home. Moved by his desire to return home, Circe told him to seek out the prophet Tiresias for news of Ithaca and help finding a way home. Easy, right?
Totally.
Well, there was one little problem.
Of course.
Tiresias was dead.
No.
So Circe gave Odysseus special instructions.
Run before the north wind until you come to the ocean stream and the grove of Persephone. At the point where the Cocytus and Phlegethon flow into the Acheron, dig a trench and sacrifice a young ram and a black ewe to Hades and Persephone. Fill the trench with the blood and wait for the shade of Tiresias. When the prophet comes, let him drink as much of the blood as he wants. Then seek his advice.
Circe gave Odysseus the ram and black ewe, and though his men feared this detour to the underworld, Odysseus set sail to find Tiresias. Thanks to the enchanted breeze Circe filled Odysseus' sails with, it didn't take long for the men to find the grove of Persephone. They beached the ship, dug the trench, and sacrificed the 2 animals. Almost immediately, ghosts and spirits began to approach the blood offering. Odysseus saw some of his dead crewmen, and he told them they could have some of the blood after he had spoken to the prophet. One of his dead crewmen, Elpenor, requested that Odysseus recover his body from Circe's island and give it a proper burial. We need a head count, Yenny.
Oh gosh, if Elpenor is dead, that means that there's only 44 men left.
Great. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Then, a woman approached the blood offering, and Odysseus saw that it was his own mother, Anticlea. But he blocked even her from the blood as well, despite the grief it caused him. Finally, the prophet arrived. Tiresias drank his fill of the blood offering, then gave Odysseus his advice.
Poseidon is angry with you and wants you dead. But if you and your men are cautious, you can make it home alive. If you must stop at the island of the sun god, Helios, during your journey home, keep your men under control. Do not let them near the cattle on that island. Once home in Ithaca, you will still be faced with trouble. There are men in your palace, trying to win your wife's favor, so that she will marry one of them. They have made themselves at home in your palace, while trying to steal your throne. But even when you make it home to Ithaca, your travels will not be over. I should be a dude. I got a sexy dude voice. You're not the only one, Sarah. I could do sexy
that was
dude
great.
voice too. Yeah.
That was great. Odysseus thanked Tiresias, and once the prophet left, Odysseus called for his mother's spirit to come drink the blood offering that remained. Anticlea drank some of the blood and asked Odysseus why he was in the underworld when it was clear he was still alive. He told her of his troubles getting home and asked her how she had come to pass away. Anticlea told her son she died of grief, waiting for him to return from war, and that his father Laertes still lived, but his grief continued on. In fact, Laertes, once a king of Ithaca himself, now lived in a hovel in the countryside and wore rags. Horrified by this, Odysseus tried to hug his mother so they could comfort each other, but he passed through her form. The two wept together, and finally, Odysseus asked what has happened to his wife and son. Anticlea tells him that his son, Telemachus, is doing his best to maintain law and order in Ithaca, as well as maintain the kingdom's relationships with surrounding lands. And Penelope is doing her best to keep the suitors at bay and buy Odysseus time to get home. But the suitors demand that Penelope choose one of them to become the new king, and they are growing more persistent as time passes. Many more ghosts come to drink the remaining blood and speak to Odysseus, including his fellow warriors against Troy, Achilles, and Agamemnon.
We'll cover their stories later, we promise, but there's just too much right now.
There's too much for today.
Oh, yeah.
When the blood was finally gone and the ghosts left, Odysseus and his crew gathered once more onto their ship and sailed back to Circe's island. Once there, Odysseus told Circe what he had learned from the prophet, and he was eager to get home to Ithaca. Circe gave him a little bit more advice, warning him of the sirens, creatures with beautiful voices, the faces of women, and the bodies of great birds of prey. Also, episode number 2 of Story Sirens.
There you go.
Their voices would lure the attention of anyone who heard them, so Circe instructed Odysseus to plug the ears of everyone on board with beeswax so they could sail on without being distracted. Odysseus thanked her for her advice and hospitality, and his ship left the island of Aiaia a final time.
Which hospitality, a little bit, she did turn your men into pigs and killed one of them. I mean, this is where Xenia comes out again, because it's like, where is the thin line between hospitable and you gon' die? So
where's the thin line between hospitality and enemies to lovers?
Yeah, weird. There's a book about it. Anywho.
Right. Soon enough during the voyage, Odysseus' crew heard voices in the distance. The men filled their ears with beeswax as instructed, but Odysseus was curious about what the sirens were saying, so his men tied him to the mast of the ship while they rowed the ship. As they rowed, the men saw monstrous birds with the faces of women, some terrifying to behold and others beautiful to look upon, but they could not hear them. Meanwhile, Odysseus thrashed at his bindings, trying to break free. The sirens sang beautifully to him and told him that they knew what happened in Ithaca during the war, what was happening in Troy at this very moment, and what would happen to his family, friends, and enemies in the future. Odysseus yelled at his crew to untie him and let him learn these secrets from the sirens. But his crew never heard him, and on they sailed, past the rocky island the sirens called home. Only one short day later, the crew sailed upon its next danger.
Oh, there we go.
Right? There was a great cliff upon which lived the six-headed monster Scylla, and beside the cliff, a massive, ship-devouring whirlpool, which was caused by the insatiable Charybdis, daughter of Poseidon. Odysseus had to navigate between the two monsters. His men were filled with fear, but there was no other path home. So onward they sailed between the cliff and whirlpool, and when Odysseus felt the pull of the whirlpool catching his ship, he overcorrected and steered too close to the cliff. Scylla reached down and caught a sailor in each of her 6 mouths. They cried out for rescue, but Odysseus could do nothing to save them without risking his other men, and steered his ship through the narrow channel to save the rest of his crew.
Oh, gosh. We're down to 38 men, Sarah. 38!
This is so tragic. On to the next danger.
Oh.
For 2 months, the men sailed onward until they saw the shores of an island. The island they found would eventually be known as Sicily, but during the time of Odysseus, it was the Isle of Helios. The men landed their ship and began to search for food and clean water.
Oh, what could go wrong this time?
What indeed? Well, the men found a pasture full of beautiful white cattle with golden hooves.
Oh, pretty.
Yes, they thought it was such a pretty sight that they wanted to slaughter some of the cattle to feed themselves.
Oh, my God.
But Odysseus remembered the warning of the prophet Tiresias. He knew these were the sun god's cattle, and killing one of them would bring the wrath of the gods down on his crew. He told his men to leave the cattle, and they would search for food elsewhere. Odysseus made his men swear to him that they'd be content with hunting and fishing and would not touch the cattle. His men swore their obedience. Well, their oath didn't mean much of anything.
Oh, God.
After several days, the men caught little in their hunting and fishing attempts, and Eurylochus grew frustrated. When Odysseus was asleep, Eurylochus convinced his crewmates that it would be fine to slaughter a few of the cattle so long as they burned some of the meat as a sacrifice to the gods and built a temple to Helios as soon as they made it home to Ithaca. Sound logic, right?
Yeah, I ain't even mad that they're gonna die. You know?
Right.
You swore, and then you lied, and then, come on. Eurylochus. God.
So the men killed several steer and began to roast the meat. The smell of cooking beef woke Odysseus from his exhausted sleep, and to his complete horror, he saw that his men had not killed just one cow, but they had killed enough cattle for all of them to feast for 6 days.
Oh, talk about just overload here.
Right? Gluttony. Odysseus told his men they had to flee the island immediately, or they would all be killed. But it was too late. Their ship had hardly covered any distance when Zeus, having heard the cries of outrage from Helios over the death of his cattle, sent a western storm wind to drive the ship once more off course. The storm was so terrible, the mast was split in two, half of it crashing into the helmsman and killing him instantly. Then Zeus threw a lightning bolt at the ship, destroying the vessel in a shower of splinters and fire. The ship and the men sank to the bottom of the ocean, with only Odysseus surviving.
And that's the crew.
That's the crew. We are down to one.
Down to one.
The king of Ithaca fought to stay afloat on some of the ship's wreckage, and even tried to lash parts of the wreck together to make an impromptu raft he could float upon. But a southern wind was sent after him, whipping up the sea into yet another storm. Whether this wind was sent by Zeus or Poseidon is debatable.
Either way, the gods wanted him dead.
Right? Odysseus saw the storm was pushing him right back towards Charybdis, who eagerly awaited the opportunity to devour him. Now remember, folks, it's been 2 months since he sailed away from Charybdis. That's how big of a deal this storm was. His raft was immediately sucked into the whirlpool, and Odysseus caught a branch that had sprouted out of the cliffside and hung on for dear life. Some believe Athena caused the branch to appear to save Odysseus. When Charybdis eventually spat the raft back up, Odysseus hopped back on it and paddled with his hands away from the whirlpool. The wind died down, the ocean calmed, and Odysseus floated for 9 days on his makeshift raft. Near death, Odysseus finally washed up on the island Ogygia, ruled by the goddess Calypso. Unlike Circe, Calypso had no ill will towards humanity. When she finds the unconscious Odysseus on her island, she instantly falls in love with him and nurses him back to health. Nice, right?
Wrong.
Calypso's love is a possessive love, and she tells Odysseus that he can be her immortal husband and rule her island with her forever. When Odysseus tells her of his love for Penelope and his desire to get home, Calypso enchants him with her voice and keeps him on her island for 7 years.
My goodness.
She used her magic to try to make him forget Ithaca and his mission, and in some variations, she then has 2 sons with Odysseus. But despite her magic, Odysseus was unhappy and was kept against his will. He would sit on the beach and stare out at the ocean despondently, and when Calypso tried to woo him with her voice and body, he had no interest. But Calypso still wanted to keep Odysseus with her, so how could he ever escape? Meanwhile, on Olympus, Athena had seen enough suffering. She is, after all, the patron goddess of Odysseus's family. She approaches her father Zeus and asks for his help in freeing Odysseus. She suggests that Hermes be sent to talk to Calypso, while she goes, in disguise, to speak with and help Telemachus. Yenny, you're up.
About time. All right, Sarah, you can take a breather. As mentioned earlier, the Odyssey actually opens with Zeus and Athena in the middle of a conversation. Zeus is talking about the drama regarding Agamemnon's family, which we will cover in another episode. Trust us, it's juicy.
Oh, it's so good.
While Zeus speaks of this, Athena intervenes and tells her father that Odysseus and his family will not be as dramatic or problematic as Agamemnon's. And Zeus agrees, but reminds his daughter that his brother Poseidon is holding his grudge, putting Zeus in a bit of a tricky position. As Sarah mentioned in the previous episode, Odysseus blinded Poseidon's son, Polyphemus. Zeus asks his daughter how they could help Odysseus come back home, and our goddess of war's eyes light up, a plan unfurling. The goddess travels to Ithaca and, being a master of disguise, disguises herself as Mentes, a man Odysseus had befriended in his journeys. She visits Telemachus at his home and sees many suitors drinking Odysseus's wine, eating his cattle, skinning his cows, and enjoying their hides, and playing checkers.
Seriously?
Seriously.
Okay.
Telemachus immediately allows Mentes, aka Athena, into their home, but quickly notices this person is not just any man. In confidence, Telemachus admits he doesn't believe himself to be Odysseus' son, and is scared the suitors will take over the home, take his mother, and kill him in the process. Enraged, Athena denounces his doubts and orders Telemachus to find a ship and travel to Pylos, and then Sparta, in search of information regarding his father. She rouses in him courage, confidence, and the hope he needs to find more about his father.
Now that's what I'm talking about.
And trust me, Athena has to do this several times, so we gotta give our girl some, recognition, because...
Well, if you think about it, this is sort of the whole, growing up journey of Telemachus, so...
Right.
Athena's gotta be like, listen, kid, I know your dad's not here, so let's work on this.
The second book opens up to Telemachus asking for a council meeting. He explains his current situation to the people of Ithaca, speaking of how his home is being ransacked by suitors and how they should be ashamed of what they're doing. One of the suitors fighting for Penelope's hand, Antinous, bites back and says they are doing this because Penelope lied to the men, saying she could not have a suitor until she finished weaving a fine cloth to use to wrap her father, Laertes, when he dies. She was able to lie to them for 4 years, until the men caught her unweaving the cloth at night.
Clever.
Telemachus tries again to plead with the suitors and people, but the elder Halitherses steps forward and reminds all about the prophecy he gave to Odysseus. He would suffer terribly after Troy, and that all his men would die, but that he would return home on the 20th year, unrecognized. Telemachus uses this moment to give his ultimatum. Let him go to Pylos and Sparta and find information about his father. If he learns he is alive, he will endure for 1 more year. But if Odysseus is dead, he will come home and give his father a proper funeral and give his mother a new husband. The suitors loosely accept this, laughing in Telemachus's face since they don't believe he could find a ship, let alone sail in one. Telemachus's confidence falters, but Athena, ever watchful, comes to the rescue again disguised and encourages the prince once more. Filled with confidence, Telemachus goes back to his home, ignoring the suitors mocking him, and begins taking inventory of what to bring on his journey. He finds his nanny, who loves him very much, and upon telling her of his departure, she starts to cry.
Aww.
He tells her to promise him that she will not say a word to his mother about his whereabouts for 12 days. Because, and I kid you not, making mommy cry will spoil her pretty skin.
Hey, Telemachus knows that Penelope has to put on a brave face for the suitors, and that Grecian skincare is no joke.
No joke whatsoever. While Telemachus took things from his home, Athena worked in tandem, disguised as him, and went about Ithaca finding him a ship and strong men. Upon finding things, she went back to Telemachus, disguised, and hurried him to the ship that was waiting for him. Book 3 opens with Telemachus and his crew arriving at Pylos. Telemachus is doubtful of his abilities once again, and Athena, disguised as a crewman of his, gives him courage and tells him to find Nestor, lord of horses, for he may have information about his father. Nestor meets Telemachus and his crew and gladly invites them to feast with his family and people. Nestor talks well about Odysseus, citing his intelligence and cleverness, and also telling Telemachus he is much like his own father. Aww. Nestor goes on to compliment Telemachus and his father, who have gained the favor of the gods, particularly Athena. This helps strengthen Telemachus's faltering confidence. Nestor tells him of Menelaus, who is currently in Sparta, and who has traveled farther than most, and may have some news about Odysseus. Filled with hope and a new friend, Telemachus, his crew, and now Nestor's son, Pisistratus, travels to Sparta. The final book in the Telemachy is the heftiest chapter. Oh, great.
Oh, great.
Oh, great. Meeting Menelaus while he is celebrating his children's marriages, Telemachus and Pisistratus, Nestor's son, join in on the festivities and learn about Menelaus's friendship with Odysseus, which makes no sense here. They're just crashing a wedding party at this point. Menelaus doesn't know that Telemachus is truly Odysseus' son until the young man tells him so, and thus Menelaus goes on to tell him what a great man his father was. Telemachus pleads with Menelaus to tell him whatever he knows about his father's whereabouts. Menelaus tells him of his encounter with the old sea god Proteus, who upon being captured lets Menelaus know that all of his companions from the war have died, but Odysseus lives, trapped in Calypso's island.
We know he lives!
We then travel back to Ithaca.
Woo! Whiplash.
Yeah, whiplash. To see Antinous, one of the suitors fighting for Penelope's hand, learning of Telemachus's travel. He couldn't believe the boy really went, and in anger riles up men and finds a ship, for he will end Telemachus's life in the sea, just like his father has perished. Penelope hears of this through one of her errand boys and falls to her knees. Apparently, Mom just thought her son was out playing with sheep for the past 12 days and, had no idea that her son had gone traveling.
Listen, your husband's gone for 20 years, your son's gone for 12 days. What is time?
Oh, fair. As Penelope wails, Athena brews up a plan to calm down Penelope and give her hope, for both her child and husband will succeed. The Telemachy ends with Antinous and his crew of suitors on the island of Asteris, lurking in the shadows and waiting for Telemachus to return and murder him. Whew, Sarah, you gotta go back in here.
Okay. Well, we're gonna leave Antinous and Telemachus for a little bit and go back to Olympus. The gods hold a second council, and everyone notices that Poseidon is not in attendance. Awkward. But Athena persists in her cause. She once again asks for Zeus to help free Odysseus from Calypso. Zeus agrees and sends Hermes to Calypso's island. And then Zeus instructs Athena to stay with Telemachus and protect him from the suitors who are planning to ambush him. Athena thanks her father and returns to Ithaca, while Hermes goes on to Ogygia. Hermes immediately finds Calypso and tells her she has kept Odysseus for long enough. He points out that every day since he arrived on the island, Odysseus has sobbed on the beach and stared at the horizon, longing for his home and family, calling to Athena for help.
Talk about being in denial.
Right?
She's like, no, he didn't.
Right? She's like, no, he loves me. It's fine. Trust me, he's just really excited right now. He's just tired this morning. That's all.
That's all. Look at our 2 kids. How are you going to tell me he doesn't?
Calypso knew that if Zeus commanded something of her, it would be suicide to ignore him. Weeping herself, she tells Odysseus that he is free to go, and she will even help him build the raft to sail back to Ithaca. So a raft was built, Provisions were provided, and Odysseus kissed Calypso goodbye and set sail once more for home.
Okay, hold up. Sir, kiss her goodbye. Sir, she kept you against your own will, dude. What do you mean kiss her goodbye? What is this?
Maybe some Stockholm. Maybe there's a little bit of Stockholm.
Okay, here we got Stockholm. Here we do.
And of course, the timing couldn't have been worse.
Yeah,
As Odysseus once more began his journey home, Poseidon was flying over the sea in his winged chariot and saw the king of Ithaca. Filled with rage by the sight of him, he launched his trident directly at Odysseus and caused a great storm to swamp the boat. The tides began to pull and drag Odysseus into the depths of the ocean, but Athena and a sea nymph, Leucothea, intervened. Odysseus managed to grab hold of some of the debris of his raft, and Athena and Leucothea hid him from view of Poseidon and washed him on the shore of the island of Scheria, home of the Phaeacians. Now, the Phaeacians were a seafaring people, and their patron god was Poseidon. Odysseus, washed up on their shores, is found by the princess of the island, Nausicaa. Of course, Athena was the one who put the idea in Nausicaa's head that she should go to the beach that particular day. The princess is instantly smitten by Odysseus, takes him into her care, helping him earn the favor of her royal parents. Odysseus tells the king and queen all about his wanderings, and in turn, the king and queen are gracious hosts. They feed him, clothe him, give him fine gifts, and provide him with a great ship in order to return home. Ironic that the people of Poseidon helped Poseidon's sworn enemy, right? Well, Poseidon found out about the Phaeacians' hospitality towards Odysseus and did in fact punish them. He might actually be the worst.
Actually, real quick, this could also, in some cases, be kind of the Atlantis variation here. Poseidon's people brought in Odysseus, and then, you know what? Poseidon didn't like that. Down you go, Atlantis. It kind of makes sense.
You're being destroyed. You are being destroyed.
Kind of makes sense. We could think this could be an Atlantis doomsday variation.
It's a crossover episode.
Crossover.
All right. So, thanks to the help of the Phaeacians, Odysseus finally makes it back to Ithaca.
Yes.
But we're not done, folks.
Nah, shit.
When he lands on the shore, Athena meets him. She disguises him as an old beggar and hides the treasures the Phaeacians gave him. The disguise is so Odysseus can learn about the state of his kingdom before people realize the king has returned, and he can see who has remained loyal and who has taken part in pillaging his home. Odysseus wandered the countryside of Ithaca and found Eumaeus, an old pig herder who worked for the palace. Eumaeus greeted the supposed stranger warmly and invited him into his home. When the disguised Odysseus asked about the happenings of the kingdom, Eumaeus was disgusted to report that over 100 young men had swarmed the palace, trying to win the title of King of Ithaca. These young men all presumed Odysseus was dead, and they all claimed their case as to why they were best suited to marry Penelope. Eumaeus also told Odysseus pretty much everything that we covered in the Telemachy. Meanwhile, Athena, still disguised as Mentes, meets Telemachus and helps him avoid the suitor's ambush. She tells him not to go straight back to the castle, but to go to the home of the pig herder, Eumaeus. Once Telemachus arrived at the pig herder's home, Athena removed the beggar disguise from Odysseus so that father and son could recognize each other.
Aww.
I know, it's very sweet. They embrace, and Telemachus tells his father about the suitors and how they are growing more hostile with each passing day. The two come up with a plan to save their queen, their throne, and their kingdom. Athena once more disguised Odysseus as an old beggar, and the pair separate, each setting out for the palace. As Odysseus made his way to the palace, he came across the sheep herder Melanthius. Hoping for the same kind of welcome he received from Eumaeus, Odysseus called out a greeting to the shepherd. Instead, Melanthius kicked at Odysseus and told him to be on his way, that Ithaca was no place for dirty beggars. Odysseus kept this behavior in mind.
Guys, remember what we talked about in our previous episode, Xenia. Specifically for Odysseus, hospitality is a big thing, and in general, the Odyssey is all about hospitality.
hospitality and loyalty.
So this is why Odysseus has kept this behavior in mind, and we wanted to put this particular person in. So.
Exactly. So meanwhile, Telemachus meets up with his mother again, and he sees that she's depressed. Obviously.
What? How could she not be?
How could she not be? He tried to cheer her up with tales of his travels to Sparta, and while she was interested in his story, she was still sad. With the pair was an oracle named Theoclymenus. At this time, he speaks up and tells the queen that Odysseus is alive, and he's in Ithaca at that exact moment. Penelope thanks Theoclymenus for trying to cheer her up, but she doesn't believe him. Odysseus arrives at the palace and sees his old dog Argos waiting outside the palace steps. The suitors have banished the dog from his home, and so he's in poor shape. He's also over 20 years old.
What?
As Odysseus approaches, Argos recognizes him, wags his tail that his master is finally home, and passes away.
Oh, no.
Quietly, Odysseus wipes the tears from his eyes.
Oh, my God. Sarah, you did not warn me, and now I'm getting oh, my gosh.
I know, I'm really sad, too. I feel like this is the worst part of the Odyssey. I'm like, no!
That's it.
It's
Why
the
you
worst
gotta kill
part.
a dog? I
know.
hate any movie that kills dogs in it.
Exactly.
I can't even watch Marley and Me. I can't watch
no.
it.
Nope. So, okay, well, here, we'll move on. I'm sorry, dear
Please.
listeners. I'm sorry. We'll put a trigger warning for this, because I would need it. Once inside the palace, he is welcomed with food and drink by the household servants. Remember, they have great Axinia. And the suitors have been rudely taking advantage of this hospitality for years. Speaking of the suitors, they see the newcomer who's disguised as a beggar, and they call upon Eris, another beggar who's been seeking shelter at the palace. For their entertainment, they tell Eris to fight Odysseus and promise to give him a seat at the suitor's feast table if he wins. Eris does so, challenging Odysseus to a boxing match, but then almost immediately backs down when he sees how strong Odysseus's arms are. But the fight commences, and Odysseus knocks Eris out with one strike. Don't worry, he doesn't kill him.
Oh, that's nice.
That would draw too much attention. Plus, the killing comes later.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Meanwhile, Athena comes to Penelope, telling her to wear her finest clothing and look as beautiful as ever when she enters the Hall of Suitors. Penelope was not pleased with these instructions, but did not argue against the goddess.
I would assume she did the right thing.
Yes.
She did the right thing.
When she made her appearance before the suitors for the evening, they were all in awe of her, including the disguised Odysseus. Remember, this is the first time he's seeing her in 20 years.
Aww.
She accepts the bridal gifts from the suitors with a warm smile, then left them without any indication of which suitor she preferred. Good for her.
Good for her.
Finally, it was late in the evening and the suitors left the palace. While they were gone, Odysseus and Telemachus gathered every readily available weapon and hid it in the armory. Still in disguise, Odysseus takes this moment to approach Penelope. The queen greets him kindly, and the beggar told Penelope he had recently met up with Odysseus and that the king of Ithaca was indeed on his way home. He was first visiting an oracle of Zeus before returning. Penelope was understandably skeptical of this story, but called upon an older maidservant, instructing her to bathe their poor guest. The maidservant who was summoned was Eurycleia, who had been the nurse of Odysseus and helped raise him.
As well as Telemachus.
Yes, as well as Telemachus. As she bathes the disguised Odysseus, she comments on how much he resembles the king. When she saw a scar on his leg that was identical to the one Odysseus had received from a wild boar, she knew the true identity of the man before her. Odysseus swore her to secrecy, rather violently, and made her promise to tell no one, not even Penelope, about his true identity.
This is like when you're selling gossip and you got to look at your mom or your grandma and be like, no puedes decir nada. You cannot
Nobody needs
say
to
a
know.
word.
Can't say anything.
You can't tell tia. You can't tell your prima. You can't tell your friend at work. Nobody needs to know. And that's why you have to do it rather violently. Because it doesn't compute in there.
It's got to get through. Eurycleia is ready to tell everyone everything, which, I mean, I get that. I sympathize with. But also, Odysseus is like, ma'am, there's a lot at stake right now.
Also, real quick, how old is Eurycleia at this point? She nursed Odysseus and Telemachus? That poor woman should be, like, in a home by now.
Right? She is an old woman. So, now clean, Odysseus the beggar presents himself before Penelope once more. The queen tells him that she has decided on one final test for the suitors, and whoever is successful at her test will be chosen as king.
Penelope, how could you?
Just wait. Here's the test. Whoever could string Odysseus's old bow and shoot an arrow through 12 axes would win the title King of Ithaca and become Penelope's new husband. Now, here are some things you should know. First, at this time, axes did either have a hole at their center or a ring at their top. So, shooting an arrow through an axe is not something that's impossible.
Got it.
Second, Odysseus's bow was a recurve bow or a backsprung bow, which was not a common weapon in Greece at this time. It had been a gift to Odysseus from Iphitus, whose family had been taught archery by Apollo himself. So for this bow, picture a bow shaped like a C, and to string it, it has to be bent all the way backwards into a backwards C, if you will. Once strung, the bow is under an immense amount of tension. It then requires even more tension to draw and fire an arrow from it. So it was a weapon that only Odysseus was familiar with, and only Odysseus was strong enough to use.
So, question. Would it be safe to say that Penelope suspected the beggar was actually Odysseus?
Totally. Odysseus, disguised as the beggar, approves of this plan and wishes Penelope good night. Morning comes, and once the suitors have gathered at the palace, the queen presents her final test. Each of them eagerly tried to string the bow, thinking this would be a simple feat. No one is successful. Telemachus, in an effort to both protect his mother and prove his own worthiness for the throne, tries and fails to string the bow 3 times. On the 4th time, however, he almost has it, but Odysseus subtly signals to him to stop.
Yeah, he's probably like, son, you can't marry your mom. This ain't Oedipus.
Exactly.
We're not doing Oedipus.
We're not doing that.
Here.
No. Antinous and the other suitors begin to rage at the impossibility of this task, and Odysseus steps forward, asking for his own chance. The suitors laugh at him, but Penelope speaks up quickly and encourages the supposed beggar to give it a try. The suitors taunt and sneer at the beggar, throwing insults at him, and Telemachus quietly ushers his mother back to her own rooms.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, things are about to get nasty. Then, Odysseus strings the bow on the first try and shoots the arrow through all 12 axe heads.
Cleanly?
You know it.
Oh,
Next, Odysseus declares his true identity, removes his disguise, quietly prays to Apollo, and shoots the strongest of the suitors, Antinous, through the throat with an arrow.
Oh, nice.
Right? The remaining suitors were terrified and rushed to grab the weapons that had been scattered throughout the palace. But they're gone, remember? Odysseus stood in the doorway of the palace, along with 2 of his faithful animal herders, Eumaeus and Philodius, firing arrows at the suitors as Telemachus fought the suitors with his sword. Melanthius, the goat herd who had been cruel to beggar Odysseus, tried to bring armor to the suitors, but Eumaeus and Philodius caught him and tied him up so he could not assist the enemy. The fight continued, with Athena, disguised as a sparrow, flying through the halls and signaling to Odysseus where suitors were gathered and hiding. With every suitor dead and the palace hall covered in blood, Odysseus tells Eumaeus and Philodius to deal with Melanthius, then seeks out his old nurse Eurycleia to ask about the loyalty of the female servants. She tells him that most of his household remained loyal to him, but 12 particular servant girls were known to sleep with the suitors and encourage Penelope to choose their particular favorite suitor.
These are also the same exact 12 servant girls that helped Penelope go ahead and unravel the cloth every single night.
Ooh, duplicitous!
Mm-hmm.
Ugh, rude. Odysseus ordered those 12 women to clean the bodies and blood from the palace, and then he called for their immediate execution.
Damn, talk about having to do work. That's like real life. Sometimes you go into work and they make you work the whole damn day to then be like, hey, we're letting you go. But thanks for doing all your work today in the morning.
Thanks for getting everything done today. Oh my
yeah,
gosh.
Totally. We appreciate you. We just don't need you anymore.
Once the palace was clean, Eurycleia goes to Penelope and asks her to come to the main hall, telling her that her husband has finally come home. Which also, bonus, I appreciate the fact that Odysseus was like, don't get her until we get rid of all this.
Yeah.
She doesn't need to see this. Which also, side note, Penelope's from Sparta. I think she'd be fine. Penelope is angered by Eurycleia coming to get her and tells the old woman that she must be losing her wits if she believes Odysseus has actually returned. I love the fact that Penelope's going back and forth between you might be my husband, but also it's been 20 years. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
When the queen arrives and sees the suitors and traitor servants are gone, and that Odysseus has removed his disguise, she still remains distant and skeptical. Telemachus is horrified by her indifference towards his father and tries to chastise her, but Odysseus speaks up. He tells his son to give them a moment of privacy. Once alone, Penelope decides on one last test to prove whether or not it is her husband standing before her.
You know, people get a little bit upset with Penelope at this point, but we have to stress the fact that it's been 20 years. A lot has happened. Of course she's going to be distant and wary of what's going on. It's 20 years, man.
She's been raising their son alone. She's been maintaining the kingdom. She's been protecting the kingdom from these suitors who are all going, oh, well, you should try to pick a new husband. He's obviously dead. While she's maintaining the hope and belief, Odysseus is out there. He promised me he'd come home.
Right.
So, Queen Penelope congratulates Odysseus on winning her contest and calls for servants to move her bed out of her bedroom and lay new blankets and cushions where the old bed had once been. This immediately distresses Odysseus. He had carved that wedding bed himself out of a living olive tree and then built their bedroom around the bed. Odysseus tells her the only way to move the bed is to kill the tree, and that destroying it would be a horrific violence towards their love. Seeing his distress, Penelope knew it was her husband, and finally she welcomed him home. The two are finally reunited, and that evening, Athena tells the dawn to delay the morning by a few hours so the couple may have a little more time together after being apart for so long.
Aw. Oh my
Right?
God, do you think this is the reason for daylight savings?
Oh my gosh, it's the Odyssey!
Jesus! What really happened is that Athena was letting Penelope and Odysseus work out those 20 years in bed.
Play some catch-up.
I love it.
Gosh. I love it too. Odysseus' father Laertes is brought back to the castle, and Odysseus, his family, and his faithful servants all enjoy a great homecoming feast together. Of course, reports of the death of over 100 suitors make its way back to the homes of the families of the suitors, and many of them are enraged. They want to fight Odysseus and avenge their dead. Many gather their forces to descend upon Ithaca, but luckily, Athena once more intervenes. She talks sense into these families, telling them of their son's vulgar behavior and how a civil war would serve no one in the grand scheme of things. The end.
Huh. Did that ending leave you feeling a bit unsatisfied?
Uh-huh.
Well, dear listener, you're not alone. It's clear that there's much more left to Odysseus' story and that of his family. As Sarah mentioned earlier, when Odysseus travels to the underworld, he meets the prophet Tiresias, who tells him he will not stay in Ithaca after slaying his countrymen. Tiresias tells him of yet another journey he must go on, one that'll finally aid him in putting Poseidon's anger at bay. Only after he accomplishes this will he live in peace, dying a gentle death and seeing his people flourish. I feel like after 24 books, Homer could have at least gone a bit longer and given us 2 more books with that extra journey, it would have been way better than the rather anticlimactic ending. This ending feels this way because of the fact that Odysseus never truly finds peace in the end. Yeah, he gets a great feast, but what after, right?
Oh, that's a bummer.
Yeah, because it is certain that the families of the murdered suitors will seek revenge, no matter what Athena does. Plus, we cannot just sweep under the rug Odysseus's infidelity, nor do I think would Penelope. There's been stories created after the Odyssey, which depict what happens to our hero after he's returned home. While I'm not going to go into every story, there is one I wanted to bring up. Oh, actually, 2. One story tells of Odysseus' son with Circe, remember his 1-year fling on the island? Who is named Telegonus. He goes in search of his father, just like Telemachus did, and ends up killing him with a poisoned spear. Of course, I don't really believe this account too much because we know that the prophet Tiresias sees Odi having a gentle death. Mm-hmm. In a variation of this same tale with Telegonus, apparently Odysseus' son marries Penelope. Way weird.
Okay.
So weird. But I lied. There's actually a third little tale. Even weirder is a completely different alternate universe type of tale, which revolves around Penelope and Hermes, which brings about the birth of Pan. But enough of the crazy Greek Wattpad fanfics, okay? We've got enough of those.
Yeah, we're done.
Let's talk about a Greek word. The word nostos in ancient Greek means homecoming, and many tales of heroes coming back from the Trojan War were known as nostoi. If nostos sounds familiar to you, it's because it's where we get the word nostalgia. Except that the tale of Odysseus' homecoming, or nostos, isn't quick. He reaches Ithaca midway through the epic tale, and yet readers cannot tell when Odysseus actually accepts that he is in fact home. But I mean, after 20 years away, home has changed.
This sounds like trauma.
Oh. This is generational trauma.
All these characters. All of them.
The oral telling and then writing of this epic tale has had a profound effect in our world today. The Odyssey, alongside the Iliad, helped the creation of classical literature. Sections of the poem have been recited for centuries, the poem itself being a must-know for all upper-class men in the Greco-Roman world. But how did the epic tale reach the Western world? How did this poem begin to be taught to young adults, analyzed by historians, and studied so much that even today the story is dissected by 2 30-year-old women who have a podcast about myths and legends?
I see what you did there.
Of course, come on now. We can thank Alexander Pope, plus some collaborators, for that. In the 18th century, he and his team translated both of Homer's works. But translations of the Odyssey, be it through text, film, and even music, are always being created. A story with so many twists and turns, with a main character that, even through all their faults, you want to see succeed and make it home, is truly a timeless tale that keeps on giving. As we mentioned in the previous episode, we've gone ahead and left you the map of Odysseus' journey in the show notes. Go see all that our hero traversed to get home to his family and kingdom. And with that, let's go into some modern media.
Woo!
If you haven't heard all the buzz about it just yet, well, we're here to let you know that award-winning director Christopher Nolan has apparently taken on a new film project, The Odyssey. Ha! Rumor has it that big names like Lupita Nyong'o, Matt Damon, Tom Holland, Zendaya, and even Robert Pattinson will be joining. The film is expected to release in July 2026. Hey, Sarah, do you think Rob will sparkle for the film too?
I'd hope so, though I know that Rob would hate that.
Probably.
All right, friends, time for our siren call. If you've already read the Odyssey, check out the Iliad by Homer as well.
The Penelopiad by Margaret Atwood tells Penelope's story through her eyes while living in 21st century Hades, as well as gives the readers points of view from the 12 maids we spoke of a little bit earlier. Funny enough, In this book, Penelope does denounce quite a few rumors that have been told about her, including her being Pan's mother.
Ooh, I like this. I haven't read that one, and so I'm going to have to check that out. Want more of Circe's story? Check out the book Circe by Madeline Miller. This is the same author of The Song of Achilles. It's an outstanding book.
And of course, go listen and cry to the musical Epic by Jorge Rivera Herranz.
Yes, I love it. I love it so much. Okay, Yenny, I think it's time we set sail into a new adventure next week.
Oh, baby, you do not have to tell me twice.
All right, we'll see you next time. Bye!
Thanks for listening to Story Sirens. You can follow us on Instagram at Story Sirens Podcast. Want to support us? Send us a cup of Ko-fi by searching ko-fi.com/storysirens. We've got lots of treats for those who become siren seekers. All research materials can be found in the episode summary. Music by Donald Guzzi and artwork by Alexis Torres. Story Sirens is a Feather and Fin production. See you soon.